Okay, it is now 3:20, and so I resume the hearing, which takes us next to policy SS20. That is site ST36. And if someone can tell me how to pronounce the name of the barracks correctly, I'll be grateful.
I understand it's Infal Barracks.
Okay, so I've been handed today two things from Mr. Henderson, which I believe he's going to kick off by talking us through.
I am, sir, yes. So we've got no objectors. We've got, obviously, Mr. Collard and Mr. Hinton for the site promoter. Two issues lie between us. Firstly, the wording of the allocation in policy SS20. The principle and very large parts of it are agreed, but some of the details, criteria are not. The second issue is the Greenbelt boundary. Now, you've got two documents. The first one, which is the track change version of the policy, goes to the first issue. The second document, the aerial photograph with the red line, goes to the second issue. In short, what they show is the Council's position as at this afternoon, having taken into account what Mr. Collard and Mr. Hinton have said in their matter statement and having reflected on that appropriately. If I can start with the first of those issues, policy SS20, and I will talk you through what you have before you. So the straightforward changes in the first paragraph, deleting by 2031 and deleting the second sentence, development is not anticipated to commence until the end of the planned period. You'll have seen from the matter statement that there wasn't precise agreement on that. Those words aren't necessary in any event, so they have gone. What has been included is the word approximately before the number of dwellings, and that reflects the approach that we've taken generally.
Just on the deletion of the timing, in effect, the 2034, and the not anticipated to commence until the end of the planned period. Is that because you think differently now?
No, sir. There is broad agreement that it will be around, I think 2030 is the date suggested by Mr. Collard and Mr. Hinton for the disposure of the site. But in essence, we don't have precision on that. So our view, we don't have a precise date. Do we need to include a precise date? We say no, this policy and the allocation works perfectly well without it being included.
Yeah, sure. But the question I have to answer, as you'll appreciate, is whether it's necessary for soundness to remove it, so hence the follow-up question. I think your answer in this case is it is not possible to be as precise as the originally submitted policy is, and there is no good reason. Well, it doesn't actually add much to the policy anyway, does it? Let's be honest.
Precisely, sir. Yeah, you've hit on it exactly. If we can't be precise about it, is there another reason for it to be in? No, there's not. Is there a good reason for it to come out? Well, yes, because it gives flexibility. And if the site comes forward earlier, that is only positive in terms of the revised trajectory that Ms. Bartle has talked you through on many previous occasions. Turning then to the criteria that follow immediately below, the amendments to the first criterion, the deletions, deal essentially with the points made in the matter statement by Mr. Collard and Mr. Hinton. We say that's sufficient. The second criterion dealing with mix, that's been deleted on the way, essentially for purposes of consistency, as we've done all along. Then we get into criteria 3 through to 5. Now, you'll have seen from DIO's matter statement, they take issue with a number of these for different reasons. The council's position on each of those criterion is that they all identify an important characteristic or constraint to the site which needs to be taken into account as it is brought forward. And they are characteristics above and beyond that which might ordinarily be dealt with simply by producing a historic impact assessment. You'll have seen, for example, in the DIO's matter statement, they make the submission, I paraphrase, but I think faithfully, well, some of this duplicates other things that we do anyway. We don't go that far. We say, actually, no, these are important characteristics this policy needs to reflect. So our suggestion, and you don't have wording, because we are going to hopefully try and agree some wording, but haven't been able to do that today, is a master planned approach. So there would be a criterion, a single criterion, simplifying numbers 3 through to 7, which would say the site is to be delivered in accordance with an agreed site master plan that takes into account, and then we will pick out from 3 to 7 each of those characteristics that is important. So it will pick out, for example, the parade ground and the open areas which are important to understand the site. And it will list those, but in a way which gives flexibility and deals, we hope, with some of the concerns raised by DIO. We then move to criterion 8. We're happy to delete that. It's dealt with in policy D6. The next change is in criterion 10, turning over the page. The addition of the words at the back of that criterion, assessed and, where necessary, mitigated. Those words are included because they are the counterpart to the deletion of criterion 13, which you'll see is one with which DIO take issue. So we've deleted that, but what we've retained is what we say is the important essence of that penultimate point, namely the provision of mitigation as and where necessary. The only other change, so, is required to appropriate, but you've seen that in other contexts, and that's for consistency in number 12.
So am I being told that where we have specific new wording and or deletions, that is common ground, and that the area that isn't common is where we don't have new words and or deletions?
I can't and I don't say that, sir, but I hope that Mr. Collard and Mr. Hinton may well do, or at least narrow the point further. I think we are much closer, but if I might invite them to help you out on that point.
So have you just finished the changes, just to be clear on that? Sorry.
Yes, that's...
Okay, thank you. Just to, obviously we've got the policy criteria in the detail there. Obviously DIO is supportive of the allocation in principle. It's a major public service asset declared surplus to requirements. As you'll have seen, we have gone through the policy in quite a lot of detail, and we've just been handed a number of further changes, which, you know, suggests the policy as written. There's a number of changes that need to be made, and we agree with some of the deletions, but we can't necessarily agree with this straight away because we haven't seen the full details. So I think the bottom line is, I think we'd like to see what the amended wording is, but if it helps, I'd quite like to just point out a few key points that we had with the policy as submitted. Appreciate there have been some changes, but just a point of accuracy, the in terms of the disposal date, it has been brought forward to 2030, and that I'm just making that as a point because the policy used the date 2031. That's identified by the latest House of Commons report, disposals database dated June 2022. It's a relatively minor point, but if the plan did refer to the date, it would need to be accurate in that regard in terms of the policy at the current time.
So just before you move off that point, Mr. Card, so I appreciate, so far as I'm aware, you've only just been handed this as I have been. So I totally take the point that, you know, you're going to have to go away and think about it. Fully appreciate that. But on the face of it, from what you've just told me about the disposal being brought forward, I would guess that you'd be reasonably happy with the first amendment proposed by the council.
I think that's fair to say, yes, sir. Just moving on then, we have made a number of other comments, number to do with repetition and wording, and I won't go through every single point, but just specifically criterion 1, and I'm referring to the submission version CD001, it refers to issues that exist on the highway network now and which might not exist when the applications for planning permission are made in respect to the site, which would be much closer to 2030. So the changes we've proposed in the policy are really suggested on those grounds for simplification and to cross-reference other local plan policies. So
I do apologise, will you bear with me one moment? Makes for great television. Sorry about that, just a touch of hay fever.
I am suffering the same way, so had my Benadryl or whatever it's called earlier. So I think the next sort of section relate to what we've sort of seen as sort of heritage policies, and the council have just handed the piece of paper and suggesting a complete change here. So I think we'd need to see what that is before we sort of comment. But as it was written as submitted, the issues we had, and I think it'd be helpful if they could be taken into account as you're revising the policy, our concern was really consistency with MPPF 2012, and our alterations were proposed on that basis to make it sound. And really our concern was the need for a heritage assessment to identify heritage assets within and adjacent to the site, which assesses the significance of those, and which thirdly assesses the extent to which their significance may be harmed by the development, and then for the policy to note any harm predicted to be caused by the proposed development will be weighed in the assessment of the proposals in accordance with the MPPF paras 128, 129, 131 and 136. But the issue we had with that policy criteria 3 was the sort of the blanket and vague assertion that buildings which are considered to be of historic interest should be retained and reused, given a balanced decision needs to be made on that. Very briefly then, policy criteria 4, and I think this comes down to there are specific features within the site referenced, like in for the parade ground, and the key point we want to make here is it's not based on any evidence provided by the council which indicates it's a necessary policy requirement. All heritage assets within the site and those off-site that might be affected by the development will be assessed for their significance and any impact that the development might have on that in the normal way when we get to a planning application. And if the analysis indicates that there are heritage assets that must be retained, they'll be dealt with in the scheme that's submitted for approval. Without full details of the significance of heritage assets on site, the council can't demonstrate it's necessary for the development to provide for the retention of the parade ground or other unspecified open areas. Of course, there's proposals to amend the wording here, so we'll reserve judgment in terms of what they come up with.
But that's putting a marker down as a starting point for your discussion, in effect.
Correct, yeah. Policy criteria 5, we just wanted to make a point here in terms of the conservation area. And it's hard to tell exactly what the amends are going to be, but it's based on speculation as what might happen in relation to the Fulford Road Conservation Area. It directly repeats the MPPF, and in our view is not required for soundness. The existing conservation area will be considered in a heritage statement to support the planning application, as well as any harm caused to the heritage assets within or adjacent to the conservation area. So in our view, that criteria should be deleted.
Do you say that criterion is unsound?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, in our view, it's not the role of the policy to speculate on the future of the conservation areas. To us, it seems superfluous, and it will take into account heritage assets that are considered at the time, and it isn't necessarily to speculate on the future of the conservation areas. Just carry on very briefly in relation to criteria 6. It appears to be a repeat of parts of criteria 3 and could be dealt with as part of that criteria. So I appreciate the council are going to have a look at that section and rewrite it, but they were some of our concerns that we sort of raised. But I think it would be helpful to have a look at what the proposed amendments are and then sort of come back with some comments. I know there is a deletion. Criteria 13 is proposed to be deleted now, and we would I think that was the point we were sort of getting at. It could be taken into account, so that's taken on board. So I think we could accept that. But we also note at paragraph 3.93 of the supporting text, we just wanted to flag at the last sentence. It says a habitat HRA will be required to accompany the proposals for the site. We think that's an erroneous reference and should be deleted. Mainly, sir, because of, there's no reference to a European site requiring HRA in that context. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Collard.
So, first criterion, the existing issues point. I'm afraid we definitely won't agree on this. There is an existing issue, that's not disputed. It's clear it's an existing issue as at the date of adoption. If by the time we get to planning application there's no existing issue, well, it'd be very straightforward for that to be demonstrated as part of the application. Certainly does not need to be amended any further for the purposes of soundness. The comments that were made on 3 through to 7, I don't think I need to come back on in detail. Because we're going to work on those. I don't accept everything that's said. I put that marker down, but I don't need to go into it in detail as we're going to take it away. What I do want to make clear, though, sir, because it may be relevant to the second issue we need to touch on, is that this is a site with 2 Grade 2 listed buildings on it. And there's been a barracks in this location since the 1800s.
Apologies, I missed the last sentence.
There's been a barracks in this location since the 1800s. So in terms of your understanding of the site and the other issues you need to consider, they are both relevant, and I deal with them there, just adding to the points made. Criterion 13 is agreed, so I don't need to say anything more on that. Paragraph 3.93, yeah, we will delete the final sentence. It is an error. The remaining paragraph, though, needs to remain in as it flags up what we say is a very important issue in terms of the development of the site. But I accept that the Walmgate Stray is not a European site for the purpose of the habitats regulations. I make no other concession as to whether an HRA might be needed for other reasons, but I accept it won't be needed because of the Walmgate Stray, and of course I'm sure DIO and their clients, DIO and Amundsen Young will appropriately screen out any impacts on other SACs when an application is brought forward, so I don't think I need to say anything more on that.
Yeah, because the requirement or otherwise for an HRA isn't a matter that necessarily needs to be spelled out in the development plan.
Precisely so, sir. So even if I've missed an SAC, it doesn't matter. It will be picked up in due course by operation of the habitats regulations.
Mr. Collard.
Just a point, really. Obviously, there's been a suggestion that the council are going to amend the policy. It'd be helpful if we could have sight of that to just provide any sort of final comments we might have that are additional that we've already made.
I suspect you know what I'm going to say. Frankly, can you please just go away and talk about it?
So that's precisely what we propose to do. So from our perspective, that's everything on what I've referred to as the first issue. And then, unless there's anything I've overlooked, the second issue is the question of the Greenbelt boundary. Mr. Collard's put his flag down, so I'm going to take that as an indication we can crack on.
Yeah, and for my part, on the basis that there's quite a bit here that's going to be discussed outside of the hearing, I don't have any further questions on the detail.
I'm grateful. So, the Greenbelt boundary, you have our latest position on the plan that I've handed up. I do want to give you, and I have to do it by way of references, or you may wish to turn it up, just a bit of context to what you see there. The area of land that we are talking about is a green wedge. Part of that green wedge is also a stray, but the first important point in my submission is that the green wedge is not restricted to the stray, it goes beyond that. Now, in terms of seeing that green wedge, CYC 59A, PDF page 17, shows you that green wedge and the stray, but it shows you that in the context of the whole of the council's area. This is a green wedge that begins very close to the city centre. It then extends out through to the Ring Road, and then you will see from the reference I've just given you, it then goes even further as part of an extended green wedge, all the way, in fact, to the boundary of the council's area. You've got the policy map in front of you, and you will...
So if you just hold for a moment, Mr. Henderson, both while I sort out this plan and whilst that ambulance moves on.
So hopefully, if you're on the southern plan, you'll see S36. The green wedge commences to the north of S36, as you can see. It then runs down through past S36. I pause and I highlight there. It is under pressure, I use fairly neutral words, from the University of York on the eastern side, almost directly adjacent to the part that we are considering today. It then runs south through the narrowing and then becomes greater as it moves out towards the ring road and indeed beyond the ring road, and you see that on the reference I gave you a few minutes ago, CYC 59A, PDF page 17. So that is the context in which we are looking at this green wedge. Now, there are broadly 3 points made by DIO against us on this question of the openness, the greenbelt purposes, and the boundary. And Ms. Healy-Brown is going to take each of those in turn and give you our position. So I'll hand over to her at this point.
Thank you. So in terms of the nature of the site and the area that DIO is proposing for the extended boundary, I think the area we're talking about is beyond the boundary, but to the area that DIO is advocating for an extension of that boundary. So that area is very much open, and indeed, as Mr. Henderson has just described, is part of the green wedge, which does include, within part of it, Walmgate Stray. So the open nature of the land in question, it includes a number of sport recreation uses, all of which are appropriate uses within the greenbelt and in turn contribute to its openness. So we can conclude that the nature of that land is very much open land. And indeed, the proposed modifications previously and the most recent one have ensured that the boundary means that the areas of built form are not within the greenbelt. Turning to greenbelt purpose, this is set out in the assessment in the annex at 59E, which is EXE CYC 59E, PDF pages 82 to 90. And I'll just draw your attention to some of the most relevant parts of that assessment. So on page 83, PDF page 83, under purpose 4 of the Greenbelt, it states that the land should be kept permanently open as part of maintaining the scale, identity and distribution of settlements around York, and to maintain a connection to the open and historic setting, and to constrain development from coalescing. The land to the east of the proposed boundary was within the green wedge, and green wedge's function is to contain the compact urban form of the historic city and divide the city's built form into identifiable segments. They prevent the lateral coalescence of different parts of the urban area, retaining the distinctive characteristics of these areas. Also, as part of Purpose 4 on the following page, under Criterion 3 of Purpose 4, which is landscape and setting, again says the land should be kept permanently open to aid the understanding of the historical relationship of the city to its hinterland. Again, noting that the land is part of the green wedge, which is a characteristic feature of York. Moving in turn to Purpose 1, checking unrestricted sprawl. The land is connected to the urban area and is therefore relevant for sprawl. As noted previously, it is area that comprises open sports fields. Those are acceptable uses in the green belt because they do preserve that openness. They provide a buffer between the urban and rural, and there's an increased risk of sprawl occurring if further development or intensification of these sports facilities occurs. And then finally, looking at Purpose 3, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. As already noted, the land is characterised by an absence of built development and urbanising influences, and the existing uses are acceptable within the green belt and provide openness. and already noted, the alternative boundary that is being proposed that would exclude those open sports fields would risk encroachment into the green belt and harm the green wedge if intensification of development occurred in that location.
So it's my fault for not being clear when I gave you the plan. But when you look at what I've given you, you have the hedge running north to south, which is the proposed DIO's proposed boundary. Hopefully that's clear. What you have immediately to the east of that is the stray. So the green wedge goes beyond that boundary into the piece of land that Ms Healy-Brown's just described. But just to illustrate that slightly further, to the north, so you will see the stray continue, but then you will see an area of allotments at the very top of that. That is for another part of this area, which is green wedge but not stray, and which contributes to the green belt. I say that, one, for clarity, but two, so that you understand here that the green wedge is much more than simply can you go hard up to the stray. There is much more to it in this area.
I would also add that if you look at the plan in document 59A, which Mr Henderson referred to previously, which sets out the plan showing all the green wedges, that shows that in all cases a green wedge may include a stray, but in all cases is larger than the stray itself.
Thank you. Mr. Collard.
Thank you, sir. Just to sort of go through greenbelt boundaries, DIO considers the plan, that the boundary in the submitted plan, which is figure 1.1 of our statement, and the greenbelt boundary as proposed to be modified to be unsound. I think the council's position is that is the same as that they think that is unsound as well, because there's the third proposed boundary, which they think it is sound, which now excludes the gym area. I'm afraid we don't think it's third time lucky for this. Just want to sort of point out in the way we think the delineation of the greenbelt boundary should be approached. It's first really to determine the land under consideration and to consider whether that land which is within the barracks site is performing one or more of the 5 purposes. And you're aware of MPPF 80 of the 2012 MPPF, whether the development would result in unrestricted sprawl, result in neighbourhood towns merging, result in encroachment in the open countryside, impact adversely on the preservation of the setting and special character of a historic town, and harm the objective of assisting urban regeneration. And in our view, sir, the answer to each of those questions as regards the lands at Infill Barracks is categorically no. The land is not performing a greenbelt role. In our view, sir, that the development wouldn't constitute sprawl or encroachment for the simple reason it's contained within the barracks site. We've clearly listed the various structures and features that are contained in the land in question, which are clearly an integral part of the barracks. The land contains a large building, hard standings, a large area used for open storage, a full-size 3G football pitch with fencing and floodlighting, tennis courts with fencing and floodlighting, an assault course with large physical obstacles, and grass, rugby and football pitches. Therefore, the majority of the land is not open, and those parts of it that are open, i.e. the grass pitches, are located between the built-up part of the barracks to the west and north, and existing housing to the south, and the land forms an integral part of the closed defence site. There's no evidence to suggest that the land makes any form of tangible contribution to the special character of York as a historic city, or that further development of the land would impact adversely on the special character of the city. Indeed, the site and the city itself are hardly perceptible in any views from north, south, or the east. Furthermore, if the land was allocated as greenbelt land, this land to the east of the allocation, that the plan would also harm the objective of assisting urban regeneration. You might recall we commented at the Phase 2 hearings on the 18th of May that the Council hadn't included Purpose 5 in the methodology for assessing greenbelt boundaries. We identified that as a flaw, but one that could be addressed when considering sites along the boundary that are currently developed sites. Or development sites, is there's a clear risk that the Council's position would actually undermine the objective of Greenbelt Purpose 5. If the land is included in Greenbelt, then we are concerned that the plan wouldn't be soundly prepared and be a failed opportunity to assist in urban regeneration in terms of consistency with that MPPF objective. So no part of the barracks site should even be in contemplation for being washed over by Greenbelt. Secondly, in line with MPPF 84 and 85, when defining the Greenbelt boundary, the Council must take into account the needs to promote sustainable patterns of development, ensure consistency with a local plan strategy for meeting identified requirements for sustainable development, not include land in the Greenbelt which it is unnecessary to keep permanently open, define boundaries clearly using physical features that are readily recognisable and likely to be permanent. So if the boundary can't run through the barracks because the land within the barracks is not of the character of Greenbelt land and is not performing a Greenbelt purpose, where should the boundary run? The answer to that question, in our view, is obvious. It should follow the barracks fence line, which is clear, physical, and likely to be as permanent as any other boundary treatment that appears adjacent to the stray. And that's as per figure 1.2 of our statement. The Council even acknowledge in their statement at paragraph 4.22.2 that they have considered a number of alternative boundaries and that the eastern boundary of the barracks is a recognisable and permanent feature. We submit that DIO's proposed boundary would prevent development from spilling over onto the stray and is a strong and defensible boundary which would limit the eastern expansion of the site. The Council also, as they've stated, appear to conflate Greenbelt considerations with matters relating to the character of the stray, and it is an erroneous suggestion that the barracks site performs some kind of a role as part of a green wedge is completely inappropriate. When setting Greenbelt boundaries, the assessment should be confined solely to Greenbelt policy matters. So in summary, the key issue here, sir, is fundamentally whether the land should be designated Greenbelt. We've set out why we say the eastern part of the site doesn't serve the purposes of the Greenbelt, and the route the boundary takes is the secondary consideration. So that's really how we've concluded our statement here. And we note we extend the offer of a site visit to Infill Barracks like last week because it's a closed site within the wire. We're quite happy for it to assist you in your considerations for you to have a walk within the site.
Yeah, as I think I previously indicated, well, if I didn't, I am now. I think Mr. Griffiths and or I would like to do both of those sites in one hit.
Sure.
So if we can, we'll put arrangements in place to do that.
Thank you, sir.
So Ms Healy-Brown will take those points in turn and I'll wrap up with a few comments at the end.
I wish we'd taken a log of how many of these we get per day. Thank you for those points. I'll try and pick up those, but do let me know if there's any that I've not covered. I'll go in reverse if I may, because I want to start with the boundary point. I think we would agree with the DIO that the boundary that they have proposed is also a boundary of recognisable and permanent features, and should a larger site be required, it does provide that purpose. However, as we've discussed before, there isn't necessarily just one boundary on land, and the boundary that has been proposed, which is the one proposed for the allocation, is also a defensible boundary of recognisable and permanent features. It is drawn tightly round the built form, and that is a consistent approach with how the council has applied setting their boundaries in similar such places elsewhere, including some of the education institutions that we've talked about. So it follows largely the built form, and then follows a bit of line of the road in the south, and then follows the tree line boundary along the actual southern boundary as well.
Are those, the line of those buildings a recognisable and permanent feature?
Yes.
Because I assume the buildings would be demolished, will they?
As part of the development they could be, but that development boundary then would be set by the building footprint that was already existing.
So I was saying, nor would you leave the wire fence?
Depending on the assessment of its significance.
I think so. Once you see it on site, you may reach a very clear view on that.
Shall I continue?
Please.
There was a point made that about the features within that open land as it stands at the moment. I did refer to this in my opening statement. It was suggested there was a large building on that land. There isn't a large building on the land anymore. I don't know. Mr. Collard can correct me. It may be due to the amendment of the boundary now. And if that's the case, that's possibly the building he was referring to.
Is that right? Is it the gym?
The gym was the largest building referred to in our list, correct?
So that has been removed.
Well, yeah, it's been proposed to be removed, yeah.
So the remaining features are, there are no large buildings, there are features which are appropriate in Greenbell's terms, in terms of sports pitches, etc. Mr. Collard talked about MPPF. I think it's important to note something that he didn't refer to, which we've talked about a lot in the last few days, is in relation to how Purpose 4 has been interpreted for York, which came from the methodology from yourself and Mr. Griffiths, and with inputs from Historic England. And I would particularly draw attention to two things. One is a special characteristic of the city is the landform, and when I went through the extracts from the document, it picks up on a number of those elements, which I won't repeat now. And then the second point Mr. Collard made on purposes of Greenbelt related to Purpose 5, which is about development in urban areas and encouraging development in those urban areas, which says you agreed would not be a purpose that was relevant for assessment of Greenbelt in York, so that has not been included, and indeed is often the case because of the difficulty of associating it on a site-by-site basis. So that's the reason that there hasn't been an assessment against Purpose 5. Thank you.
Mr. Collard.
Oh, so
Did you want to finish, Matt?
I know, so I was probably slow off the mark. Just want to draw your attention, when you're in CYC 59E, page 85, you will see an illuminating and indeed interesting history of the barracks as it is relevant to the Greenbelt boundary. One of those things that you will see is, for example, historic remains of obstacle courses and trenches and the like. Within the green wedge, all of which are consistent with the analysis that Ms. Healy-Brown has given you on where we draw our boundary, and all of which demonstrate that those forms of sports pitches and the obstacle course, appropriate in the way that she's described, are also consistent there is a consistent approach being adopted by the council here to how we treat those features in this local area, all within the green wedge.
Mr. Collard.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to come back on a point that was made in terms of is the boundaries proposed by the council strong and defensible, given that when the site is redeveloped, the development, and the point is the council is now relying on existing features of the barracks remaining. The existing fence line or fencing within the site, for example, is likely to be removed to facilitate development, and in doing that will leave areas of hard standing either side of the council's proposed boundary. It is not, in our view, considered a strong and defensible boundary. The only robust solution is to include the boundaries proposed by DIO, which is in the entire barracks site, to ensure the greenbelt boundaries endure beyond the plan period. And it's just to point out, as you walk the site, sir, you will notice, the council's boundary has changed twice since submission, and this is, there's large building which is a gym that's now been included in. This is a closed defence site with built features, hard standings, etc. So we say the boundary should be realigned to include the complete barracks site. Thank you, sir.
It feels to me as though we are probably exhausting the points that people want to make. Is that right, Mr. Collard, or is there anything else on this that you wanted to say?
No, thank you, sir.
From your side, Mr. Henderson?
No, nothing from us, thank you.
Yeah, okay. No further questions from me either. Unless there's anything else on this side.
Nothing further from us, sir. Thank you.
No,
Good.
sir, not on this site.
Anything else we need to pick up on
Mr. Delvin has a few points he wishes to raise, sir. Not on this site.
Oh, no.
I'd like to be very clear.
Don't.
So you can draw a line under that, sir.
Mr. Alvin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the draft Phase 4 programme. If you want to talk about it today, I'm happy to raise it tomorrow, depending on your preference.
No, I'll take that now, with the caveat that I haven't looked at it.
Right. Okay. I think it's unwise to assume that York plus your additional OAN question can be done in a day.
So do I.
So, well, good. Right. So, as you know, I'm away after the 13th, and I know you're not here from the 13th. Is that something you want to be here for?
Yes.
Can we do it separately from the university?
Yes.
In which case, shall we do that in week 1 and move? There are greenbelt issues which run into week 2 anyway, so it seems to me perfectly feasible to do the inner boundaries in week 1 of the greenbelt, put the outer boundaries, etc., into week 2 with the other issues, and put the OAN into at the end of week 1, then you can hear it and I can be here.
Yes, I'm a visual learner, and I don't have my copy of what Mr. Griffiths has sent through in front of me. But in terms of the general principle, yes, I think it's right to deal with the question about OAN separately. And I flagged that with Miss Bartle, because it may well involve many other participants that have no interest in the University of York issue per se, aside from anything else. And I don't think that we would cover all of the issues in one day in any event. But I think Mr. Griffiths put that there as a starter for 10, because we were a little bit unsure about availability on your side, etc., and exactly how you would want to deal with that.
As I say, it's Mr. Linus's punishment 3 weeks for being in Greece and Italy for this phase. The other thing I was going to suggest is that we move transport and air quality up, so I can be there for that, because I've been doing most of the transport stuff. So if we swap transport and air quality with placemaking, design, heritage and culture, transport is on the Thursday of week 2, placemaking, design, heritage and culture is on the Tuesday of week 2. If we swap those 2 round, then I can be here for transport.
I'm frankly more than happy, Mr. Alvin, for you to have a tinker with. Have you got an electronic copy?
No, only the paper version that you handed, unless Carol has sent it to Kirsten or colleagues directly, in which case...
I mean, I'm happy to email the suggestions to Carol, and then she can circulate them to you and Mr. Griffiths.
Yeah, I was going to say equally I could get her to send you whichever way you want to do it.
Send me the
Actually, I'd prefer to do it that way. We had some stickiness when we were looking at the timetabling for this phase. So if that could be avoided this time round, I'd be immensely grateful.
Yes.
Thank you. So just in terms of sort of time scales, and is that something that you're able to have a look at today, early tomorrow, and send through to Mr. Griffiths and through to Carol soonish? I'm just quite keen to issue the MIQs.
Yes, sure, certainly, sir, and as are we, and we'll make sure that we do that. We'll circulate with colleagues and work that through.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Was there anything else then before I adjourn for the day?
No, thank you.
Marvellous. In which case then it's 4:13. I adjourn the hearing to resume tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you all very much.